So today I'll be doing 2 sutta readings. The first, I think a few of us have read, but I found to be a good one to return to. It's Anguttara's 3, number 102. It's called a Goldsmith. And
Can you speak up?
Sure.
Can you repeat the name?
What's that? The name of the sutta is a Goldsmith, and it's from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, number 102. And the second sutta is from the Samyutta Nikaya. It's from the Nidana Vagga and the Nidana Samyutta. It's number 51, called A Thorough Investigation. And the number associated with that is book 2, chapter 12, number 51. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Bhikkhus. When a bhikkhu is devoted to the higher mind, from time to time he should give attention to 3 marks. From time to time he should give attention to the mark of concentration. From time to time to the mark of exertion. From time to time to the mark of equanimity. If a bhikkhu, devoted to the higher mind, attends exclusively to the mark of concentration, it is possible that his mind will veer towards laziness. If he attends exclusively to the mark of exertion, it is possible that his mind will veer towards restlessness. If he attends exclusively to the mark of equanimity, it is possible that his mind will not be properly concentrated for the destruction of the taints. But when a bhikkhu, devoted to the higher mind, from time to time gives attention to the mark of concentration, from time to time to the mark of exertion, from time to time to the mark of equanimity, his mind becomes malleable, wieldy, and luminous, pliant and properly concentrated for the destruction of the taints. Suppose bhikkhu, a goldsmith or his apprentice, would prepare a furnace, heat up the crucible, take some gold with tongs and put it into the crucible. Then, from time to time he would blow on it, from time to time he would sprinkle water over it, and from time to time he would just look on. If the goldsmith or his apprentice were to exclusively blow on the gold, it is possible that the gold would just burn up. If he were to exclusively sprinkle water on the gold, it is possible that the gold would cool down. If he were to exclusively to just look on, it is possible the gold would not reach the right consistency. But if the goldsmith or his apprentice from time to time blows on it, from time to time sprinkles water over it, and from time to time just looks on, the gold would become malleable, wieldy, and luminous, pliant, and properly fit for work. Then whatever kind of ornament the goldsmith wishes to make from it, whether a bracelet, earrings, a necklace, or a golden garland, he can achieve his purpose. So too, when a bhikkhu is devoted to the higher mind, from time to time he should give attention to the 3 marks. From time to time he should give attention to the mark of concentration, from time to time to the mark of exertion, and from time to time to the mark of equanimity. If a bhikkhu, devoted to the higher mind, attends exclusively to the mark of concentration, it is possible that his mind will veer towards laziness. If he attends exclusively to the mark of exertion, it is possible that his mind will veer towards restlessness. If he attends exclusively to the mark of equanimity, it is possible that his mind will not be properly concentrated for the destruction of the taints. But when, from time to time, he gives attention to the mark of concentration, from time to time to the mark of exertion, and from time to time to the mark of equanimity, his mind becomes malleable, wieldy, and luminous, not brittle, but properly concentrated for the destruction of the taints. Then, there being a suitable basis, he is capable of realizing any state realizable by direct knowledge toward which he might incline his mind. If he wishes, may I wield the various kinds of psychic potency. Having been one, may I become many. Having been many, may I become one. May I appear and vanish. May I go unhindered through a wall, through a rampart, through a mountain as though through space. May I dive in and out of the earth as though it were water. May I walk on water with the earth. May I walk on water without sinking, as though it were the earth. Seated cross-legged, may I travel in space like a bird. With my hand, may I touch and stroke the moon and sun so powerful and mighty. May I exercise mastery with the body as far as the Brahma world. He is capable of realizing it, there being a suitable basis. If he wishes, may I, with the divine ear element, which is purified and surpasses the human, hear both kinds of sounds, the divine and human, those that are far as well as near. He is capable of realizing it, there being a suitable basis. If he wishes, may I understand the minds of other beings and persons, having encompassed them with my own mind. May I understand a mind with lust as a mind with lust, and a mind without lust as a mind without lust, a mind with hatred as a mind with hatred, and a mind without hatred as a mind without hatred, a mind with delusion as a mind with delusion, and a mind without delusion as a mind without delusion, a contracted mind as a contracted mind, and a distracted mind as distracted, an exalted mind as exalted, and an unexalted mind as unexalted, a surpassable mind as surpassable, and an unsurpassable mind as unsurpassable, a concentrated mind as a concentrated mind, and an unconcentrated mind as unconcentrated, a liberated mind as liberated, and an unliberated mind as unliberated. He is capable of realizing it, there being a suitable basis. If he wishes, may I recollect my manifold past abodes, that is, 1 birth, 2 births, 3 births, 4 births, 5 births, 10 births, 20 births, 30 births, 40 births, 50 births, 100 births, 1,000 births, 100,000 births, many eons of world dissolution, many eons of world evolution, many eons of world dissolution and world evolution thus. There I was so named, of such a clan, with such an appearance. Such was my food, such was my experience of pleasure and pain. Such was my lifespan. Passing away from there, I was reborn elsewhere. And there too I was so named, of such a clan, with such an appearance. Such was my food, and such my experience of pleasure and pain. Such my lifespan. Passing away from there, I was reborn here. May I thus recollect my manifold past abodes and their aspects and details. He is capable of realizing it, there being a suitable basis. If he wishes, may I, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, see beings passing away and being reborn, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, and understand how beings fare in accordance with their kamma thus. These beings who engage in misconduct by body, speech, and mind, who reviled the noble ones, held wrong view, and undertook kamma based on wrong view, with the breakup of body, after death, have been reborn in a plane of misery, in a bad destination, in the lower world, in hell. But these beings who engaged in good conduct by body, speech, and mind, who did not revile the noble ones, who held right view, and undertook kamma based on right view, with the breakup of body, after death, have been reborn in a good destination, in the heavenly world. Thus, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, may I see beings passing away and being reborn, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, and understand how beings fare in accordance with their kamma. He is capable of realizing it, there being a suitable basis. If he wishes, may I, with the destruction of the taints, in this very life, realize for myself, with direct knowledge, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, may I dwell in it. He is capable of realizing it, there being a suitable basis. Thorough investigation. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi, in Jeta's grove, and not Pindika's park. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, "Bhikkhus." "Venerable Sir," those bhikkhus replied, the Blessed One said this, "Bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is making a thorough investigation, in what way should he thoroughly investigate for the utterly complete destruction of suffering?" "Venerable Sir, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One, guided by the Blessed One, take recourse in the Blessed One. It would be good if the Blessed One would clear up the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the bhikkhus will remember it." "Then listen and attend closely, bhikkhus. I will speak." "Yes, Venerable Sir," the bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this, "Hear, bhikkhus, when he makes a thorough investigation, a bhikkhu thoroughly investigates thus: the many diverse kinds of suffering that arise in the world, headed by aging and death. What is the source of this suffering? What is its origin? From what is it born and produced? When what exists does aging and death come to be? When what does not exist does aging and death not come to be?" As he thoroughly investigates, he understands thus: the many diverse kinds of suffering that arise in the world, headed by aging and death. This suffering has birth as its source, birth as its origin. It is born and produced from birth. When there is birth, aging and death comes to be. When there is no birth, aging and death do not come to be. He understands aging and death, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading on that is in conformity with its cessation. He practices that way and conducts himself accordingly. This is called a bhikkhu who is practicing for the utterly complete destruction of suffering, for the cessation of aging and death. Then, investigating further, he thoroughly investigates thus: what is the source of this birth? What is its origin? From what is it born and produced? And it continues, what is the source of existence? This clinging, this craving, this feeling, this contact, these 6 sense bases, this name and form, this consciousness. What is the source of these volitional formations? What is their origin? From what are they born and produced? When what exists do volitional formations come to be? When what does not exist do volitional formations not come to be? As he thoroughly investigates, he understands thus. Volitional formations have ignorance as their source, ignorance as their origin. They are born and produced from ignorance. When there is ignorance, volitional formations come to be. When there is no ignorance, volitional formations do not come to be. He understands volitional formations, their origin, their cessation, and the way leading on that is in conformity with their cessation. He practices that way and conducts himself accordingly. This is called a bhikkhu who is practicing for the utterly complete destruction of suffering, for the cessation of volitional formations. Bhikkhus, if a person immersed in ignorance generates a meritorious volitional formation, consciousness fares on to the meritorious. If he generates a demeritorious volitional formation, consciousness fares on to the demeritorious. If he generates an imperturbable volitional formation, consciousness fares on to the imperturbable. But when a bhikkhu has abandoned ignorance and aroused true knowledge, then, with the fading away of ignorance and the arising of true knowledge, he does not generate a meritorious volitional formation, or a demeritorious volitional formation, or an imperturbable volitional formation. Since he does not generate or fashion volitional formations, he does not cling to anything in this world. Not clinging, he is not agitated. Not being agitated, he personally attains nibbana. He understands, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not held to. He understands it is not delighted in. If he feels a painful feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not held to. He understands it is not delighted in. If he feels a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he understands it is impermanent. He understands it is not held to. He understands it is not delighted in. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels a painful feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he feels it detached. When he feels a feeling terminating with the body, he understands, I feel a feeling terminating with the body. When he feels a feeling terminating with life, he understands, I feel a feeling terminating with life. He understands, with the breakup of the body, following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. Mere bodily remains will be left. Suppose, bhikkhus, a man would remove a hot clay pot from a potter's kiln and set it on smooth ground. Its heat would be dissipated right there, and potsherds would be left. So too, when he feels a feeling terminating with the body, terminating with life, he understands, with the breakup of the body, following the exhaustion of life, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. Mere bodily remains will be left. What do you think, bhikkhus? Can a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed generate a meritorious volitional formation, or a demeritorious volitional formation, or an imperturbable volitional formation? No, Venerable Sir. When there are utterly no volitional formations, with a cessation of volitional formations, would consciousness be discerned? No, Venerable Sir. When there is utterly no consciousness, with the cessation of consciousness, would name and form be discerned? No, Venerable Sir. When there is utterly no name and form, no six sense bases, no contact, no feeling, no craving, no clinging, no existence, no birth. With the cessation of birth would aging and death be discerned? No, Venerable Sir. Good, bhikkhus. It is exactly so and not otherwise. Place faith in me about this, bhikkhus. Resolve on this. Be free from perplexity and doubt about this. Just this is the end of suffering.
Namayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karanga Dhammase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami. Questions, comments?
In that very last section, where the Buddha asks, could someone who is completely liberated from the taints generate a volitional formation, a meritorious, demeritorious, or imperturbable mental formation? And the answer is no. I guess seems that must be a different form of mental volitional formation than is used in other in ordinary contexts, or I'm not quite, because certainly liberated people seem to think.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely seem to think, but it also, because in terms of how that's categorized, they all have results, whereas for a liberated being, then they don't result in resulting in being, and that is not the case. Right? Not a result. There's no residual in that sense. Doesn't mean what they do isn't good or something, but it's a categorization of how things are looked on in terms of resulting in terms of being and becoming.
Yeah, it's just it would be proper to say that an enlightened being will generate a volitional formation, but it's not based on ignorance and, as you say, not having a result and having a harmful result that leads to rebirth.
This came up a couple weeks ago. So am I understanding correctly that a liberated being will essentially is not making fresh karma?
Exactly. It's not making fresh karma. The reality, of course, is, say, what the Buddha did certainly had results, but not for him personally. In the sense he is able to end the cycle of birth and death.
Yes, there's this analogy, somebody brought it up one time around Luang Por Pasanno. It could be really any Arahant, sort of like a speedboat that at some point going along, like the motor's been cut, but there's still movement. It's still like the boat keeps going, but the motor is no longer.
Yeah, but it's not. It's a particular category, in the sense of how one. Because as I said, it isn't as if either, say, the Buddha or these great beings, they don't leave something in the world. Sure. But it's not leaving something for themselves to re-establish identity with. Yeah.
On this idea of volition, when the mind does become steady and responds to whatever direct, I keep getting into this, like, I have to choose kind of dukkha. Like, you know, like, why do I have to choose anything to be conscious of? But something has to be chosen. And then that seems to be like, yeah, like, what to choose? Or is there a way of not choosing?
Well, I think that's, you know, in the sense of again, because one is choosing an action, but one isn't choosing the identification with it. So that the action is chosen, in the same way that the Buddha is sort of both encouraging people to develop the path, or to refrain from certain action. That is like all the admonishment in the Vinaya. Those are very clear choices that the Buddha is making, but it isn't building a sense of me around it.
That I'm choosing. It's like no sense.
Yeah. But I mean, there's your choosing, but not identifying. There's a distance there that is recognizing clearly what is skillful, what's unskillful, what's beneficial, what's not beneficial, but then not having to get entangled in the process of the me.
I guess still what I struggle with that in the idea of formations and like consciousness and being formed, like with that, it's like that. I just keep thinking that the suspension of that has to be a non-choosing, like.
Well, I mean,
there's no object or no thingness or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, on a certain level, I mean, there's a because it's so clear to an awakened being, then it isn't that the Buddha has to choose to not do something unskillful. It's just it's so clear. It's like the Buddha, how's the image that the Buddha uses in the way of he gives that image of knowing the parts of a chariot so clearly that he doesn't have to think about it or describe it, and so that's it's something that it's a built I say almost an innate directing of attention. So I mean, it's hard. You know, we're having to give similes from the world. So it's there, and all similes are not quite sufficient. But it's like one of the maybe another image is like I'm reading this book, Moonwalking with Einstein, and they where people train themselves to look at the cloaca of like chicks that are just born, to be able to discern whether they are male or female. They're only a day old, and you can't figure that stuff out. But it's somebody who is trained over and over again, so that they become so skilled at doing it. They don't have to think about it, and that so that's something similar, I think, with you know, again, it's an imperfect analogy, but it is something like beyond, like an ordinary person it's looking at a day-old chick and sort of, it just looks like like a ball of fluff, you know. And but then somebody who, and apparently it started in Japan. Now it's all around the world. Because for in the poultry industry, then they have to you can't be wasting your money raising male chicks. And until the sexual characteristics show up about a month or two later, so that they're trained, and then so they're not thinking about it. It's something that is discerned immediately. So it's something like that. Something like that where the Buddha understands reality so clearly. Or an awakened being understands it so clearly that it's not that you're having to volitionally put forth any attention on what's right, what's wrong, what's skillful, unskillful. It's understood immediately. That's an attempt at an analogy.
Or is it all another kind of problem similar to what we were speaking about yesterday with almost needing to, for the sake of certain discussions, reify what it is that acts through an Arahant? Like if you're dismantling everything, but I just remember Ajahn Yaniko was talking about how like in the context of this discussion, how like for most people Kilesa is what's acting, but for an Arahant it's Dhamma that's acting, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. And then one is so steeped in Dhamma that it's like the Dhamma deciding for itself what is in accord with Dhamma.
It's kind of how I'm going to run by you how I've kind of matched these ideas up to my experience and see what you think. It's kind of like I've thought of as like the heart is when it's like with knowledge, with the arising and passing away, then it's like it hasn't really it doesn't generate a sankhara, and then it hasn't gone out and like formed something. It hasn't like bound itself to things in the world. So like even if there's like at a physical level like movement or something, if the heart's still kind of still like at home, aware of arising and passing away, then it hasn't, even though it's like might be acting, it hasn't really generated a volitional formation in the sense that like it just kind of becomes separate, like that thought and that experience of arising and passing away.
Yes, but then it's also not moved out towards, even if it hasn't moved out to an identification with itself either. Mm-hmm. Which is the it isn't just going out to the world. It's also, it isn't going out to an identification with a me.
Right.
Or with, this is my mind, that I have to. So it's there's a clarity there that is all encompassing.
I think that's an interesting one because I remember Luang Por Dun.
Yes.
Bun saying the mind sent outside is suffering.
Yes.
Without the mind sending outside, it's the cause of suffering and then the suffering.
Yeah.
But Luang Por Dun doesn't say about identification.
Yeah, but I mean that's also even the identification with self is a mind going outside of itself. So it's a movement. It's an extrapolation. Because I think Luang Por Dun was somebody who had quite a. I mean, he was somebody who was really, in terms of unshakable beings, that was unshakable being. It was really quite wonderful to be around him.
Luang Por, before you returned, we heard a reading of his teachings from Gifts He Left Behind, Luang Por Dun. And I was really impressed by it. I really found the teachings really great. But were you able to pay respects to him when you were teaching?
Oh, yeah. First time I met him, I'd heard about him and was, and then he actually brought his lake people to Ubon and to Wat Nana Cha, and he was an old man at the time, and then he asked me to give a talk, and he's sitting there, and I just felt incredibly intimidated to get up on the Dhamma seat while this venerable old monk is sitting there. And I said, oh, there's no point in me getting up there, please. And he said, no, I want you to give teachings to lay people. And I remember there was one. I was quite nervous, but then once I started speaking, and it was fine, and then giving teaching, and then there was questions and answers after, and I remember when there was this question, almost sort of a philosophical question, and in Thai, I think it makes a bit more sense, but the question was sort of like, what's Nibbana like? And I said, well, Nibbana's not like anything. And then after the talk, then I got down, paid respects to Luang Por Dun, and he said, that was a good answer. So it was because there's something like Patnipan Kualai. And I got my Kualai. So it was just okay. And then he invited me on a couple of occasions to go down to his monastery and give teachings there. So I had a few meetings with him, and also when Ajahn Chah was ill, and then invited by the Queen to be looked after at Chulalongkorn University, Chulalongkorn Hospital. She had there's a royal suite that she had Luang Por Cha stay there, and treatment was given and diagnoses and whatnot. And then after a couple of months, and was sort of, okay, this isn't doing anything, take Luang Por back to Wat Pah Pong. Then basically almost as soon as Luang Por Cha left, then Luang Por Dun went into that same suite. He was like the Queen inviting him to be treated. That was very much toward the end of his life. I got to pay respects again one last time.
I think one of his teachings was the mind watching the mind is the path.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you balance? I think you have an emphasis on watching the body, and how is the balance between the body and the mind?
There's no separation.
So when you emphasize watching the body, you're referring to the mind as well.
Well, I'm using the body as a mirror or a vehicle for understanding more clearly what the mind is doing. Because usually what happens when we say, oh, I'm going to watch my mind, then we just get tangled up in the mind and the moods and the proliferations, and it's all about me and my mind. The body's a bit more helpful and sort of saying, God, this is a burden. Whereas the mind tends to be, I think especially for us is when there's so much identification with me and my mind, that it's a helpful way of stepping back a bit, getting a bit of separation.
But at a point, if there's a lot of stability, is there a shift sometimes in the meditation where I can feel the stability and I'm able to sit with the mind more so I can be with the mind?
There's no body and no mind. That's really what you want to be paying attention to. Really being able to... Because as soon as you start dwelling in any of those concepts, and you're hooked.
Curious your thoughts on so the word citta. Yeah. We sometimes see it translate, even within our own chanting book. Sometimes it's heart, and sometimes it's mind. Yeah. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts about. I mean, if it's worth distinguishing, is one more accurate, or it feels like it's like deeper than just our thoughts. Like it's not necessarily
it's a much larger, bigger vehicle than just my moods and my thoughts. So citta is encompassing the whole range of thought, cognition, emotion, discernment. Citta is a much larger vehicle, especially as a concept. Because it's also even you see it in the suttas over and over again. It's just like he was speaking, and it is liberated.
Lampa, as far as mana and citta, what's more of the differences there?
Mana is much more on the cognition level, thought process level. Mano vinyana is much more on the cognitive functions and the functions of thought in terms of thought processes.
Ajahn Jeff uses the translation for mano as intellect.
Yeah. So that consciousness of the intellect.
I like that Ajahn Jeff, a couple of years ago when he was at the Hermitage, once commented, and I had never realized it, but that the term citta is not actually defined by the Buddha in the canon. It's just, all of it is by implication or inference.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So you have to get a feel for it by how it's used.
Yeah. That's wonderful. The Buddha wasn't going to sort of paint himself into a corner.
Dovetailing off of Paul's question, if you do look at the context of the four satipatthana, and also with the thing about understanding the surpassed mind and the unsurpassed mind, I've always been confused between the difference between the contemplation of feelings and of the mind. Mm-hmm. Is the mind more like the broad mood of the mind? And also, how does contemplation of the Dhammas fit into that?
In terms of the satipatthana, then you're looking at different functions or different phenomena, sort of the body as a phenomena, the feeling and feelings as a phenomenon, the mind as a phenomenon. So it's more like that, and it's quite defined quite well in the sense of it's that content of the mind. So the knowing the mind with greed is a mind with greed, the mind without greed is a mind without greed. So the sort of content mood of the mind. Whereas, say, like Dhammas is more around approaches of dealing with the whole body-mind experience, the khandhas, sense bases. You're looking at the factors of enlightenment, Four Noble Truths. You're looking at it from a reflective and investigative perspective.
And would the difference between looking at the content of the mind in terms of citta-nupassana and contemplation of feelings be like the feelings are more the objects running around the canvas, which is
no. Feeling is much much more the like that feeling tone of whether it's a physical or mental feeling, but then also understanding the because and these are not absolutely separate categories that have nothing to do with each other. They have everything to do with each other, but they're just ways of directing attention, and there is a certain discrete experience, but it's looking at the feeling tone, because we're driven by those feeling tones. The pleasant is as I think it's in the the lesser discourse on questions and answers. So the pleasant is going to tend to stimulate greed. The unpleasant is tending to stimulate the aversion, and the neutral is going to tend to generate the delusion. So seeing where that, because in that conditioning process, I mean, one is seeing how what that content is in terms, or that tone is, but it's also like, especially it's more clear in the the Anapanasati Sutta, where one's using feeling in a way to understand the citta sankharas, the conditioners of the mind. The conditioners are those basic feeling tones, are then feeling and perception, memory, are what are conditioning the content of the mind.
Long Por, I was just on a Goenka retreat, and he kept saying over and over again, if you sit with the pain in your body, it will eliminate sankharas. I've heard that. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I've heard that too. I have a doubt about that. I mean, it's how one works with it, but just as a categorical statement.
Yeah, that was the only thing I had it down about. The rest of the Dhamma was very good.
How would you recommend working with pain in order to relinquish it?
Well, I mean, pain, you have to pay attention to it, because in the sense of, okay, what is it conditioning? Because sometimes we can pick that up, say, just like, okay, if I just sit with this pain, then I'll be able to wear out whatever habit of mind I have, or the formations, mental formations around that. But it can be the cause for building formations. Because I remember, I mean, I've had to work with a lot of pain through my whole monastic sort of career in it. And early years of meditation were really dealing with a lot of pain. And I was, I'm pretty stubborn and so just, but what I found was what it was doing was, it wasn't really brightening the mind. And I end up developing an aversion to sitting meditation. So that's a possibility as well. So you have to see what the result is, and it has to be worked skillfully, because pain makes things very immediate. I mean, you cannot drift off. Well, you can, but generally speaking, your pain puts you into the present moment. And but then you have to be able to hold it skillfully, and it's okay. How do I use it? And then how do I? Because if it's just this constant sort of frontal assault on pain, then it sometimes it can be end up being discouraging. I mean, there's times when you break through that pain, and you can do that, and I've done that many times, where just you go through the pain, and then it opens up into real peace and energy. But you have to see what the result is, and so that pain, I think, is an important basis for investigation of, well, what are the habits of mind, and what are the habits of the self creation around pain, because we can feel sorry for ourselves a lot if we keep returning to the pain. So there does need to be some balance in terms of investigation of pain. Because if you run away from pain all the time, I mean, there's no end to that, because that's just a part of the human condition. So we have to understand it. But if there's and the Buddha actually sort of says, the uninstructed worldling knows no other escape from pain other than sensual pleasure. So that pain is a really helpful way. So what skillful tools am I building or learning or understanding that allows me to not just react as an uninstructed worldling? But then it has to be balanced with how do I bring about some kind of pleasurable, or at least neutral, experience, so that there's not this constant hammering from pain. So there's just developing discernment and wisdom with the how do we nourish practice in a way that's actually both sustainable and fruitful. And that's an important, and we have to do that anyway. But pain is actually a helpful reminder of that. I got to figure this out, because this kind of sucks, or this is difficult, and so that difficulty can be a motivator, but it can't just be constant.
I've had a strange experience sometimes, maybe it's not so strange actually, where if I'm in a great deal of pain, I can sit for quite a while because I have a very specific task at hand. Very focused, very driven. I'm in a great deal of pain and I need to figure something out here. And then other times where if I'm not in so much pain, I can't sit very long. You know what I mean? It's sort of, if there's more neutral feeling, or I'm actually kind of feeling okay, there's not that push.
Yeah, no, I mean that's again, it's not black and white, and we can get there is that how do you say, the immediacy that pain gives, but it's also you have to be able to how do we balance that? How do we bring about a sense of immediacy with, say, neutral? How do we bring a sense of immediacy with, even the pleasant, where we're not just indulging and getting pulled into a pleasant feeling and attaching to it? But it's also sort of recognizing where the Buddha is saying, that the happy mind is easily concentrated. And that's a refrain that comes through the suttas over and over and over again. Where how do we bring about a sense of happiness that isn't based on a sensual object? Okay.